Hey guys, it's Ellen Brock, freelance editor. We've been talking about structure all week. Yesterday I talked about the second plot point, and today I'm going to talk about the climax. Pretty much everybody is familiar with what the climax entails at its essence. It's the final showdown, or it's the moment where the character either achieves their goal or fails to achieve their goal. Depending on the genre, it could be a huge battle or it could be a simple interpersonal drama. The two most likely issues to occur with the climax are that either the climax doesn't really exist, the novel sort of fizzles out, it just ends at kind of an arbitrary point, and there's not a clear climactic scene. The second problem is that the climax occurs too early and there's too much material after the climax. This is common if there's a lot of characters or a lot of things that you want to wrap up, or for some writers it's just kind of hard to say goodbye to the characters and they keep the novel going for too long after the climax. So I'm not going to talk too much about wrapping up the novel after the climax because it's not particularly complicated, but I would try to note that it shouldn't take up more than maybe 2% or 3% of your novel, and for some novels it may be rather immediate that the novel ends after the climax. So just make sure that you don't put your climax too early or that you don't linger too long after the climax, and to make sure that the climax does exist, that there's a clear moment where the character tries to achieve their goal and either succeeds or fails. One of the really important elements of the climax is that the protagonist should not have been able to succeed earlier in the novel. So at the beginning of the novel, the character should not have been able to successfully defeat the antagonistic force. This could be because the character is not capable of doing it at the beginning of the novel. It could be because the character doesn't have the information necessary at the beginning of the novel. There are a lot of reasons, but one problem that you definitely want to avoid with the climax is that sense that it could have happened earlier and that there isn't really necessarily a good or compelling reason for why the climax occurred so late. Because if that happens, the pacing often will feel odd and the climax won't feel as satisfying, because if the reader has the impression that this character probably could have defeated the antagonist at any point in the story, it really loses a lot of that interconnectedness and a lot of the solidity that we want to go for when writing a novel. So I talked about this a little bit in the previous video yesterday about the second plot point. One way to help give that sense that the rest of the journey is relevant, that all of the things that have happened prior to the climax are relevant, is to have the climax require that the character use information or a skill or an ally, anything that has been obtained through the journey of the novel, so that the character is now equipped with things that they didn't have before. So there's been a change in what the character is capable or able to do. Another really important element of the climax is that the character should complete their character arc either right before or during the climax of the novel. So this often takes the form of some sort of personal sacrifice. Often the character needs to let go of a previous flaw or belief, something that's been holding them back. Depending on the character, they may have to give up what their initial goal was, especially if the goal was not necessarily kind-hearted or not necessarily positive. And in that case, the character will often have to give up their goal, but they will learn something in the process. So they will succeed in the sense that they will have grown as a person, or they will have learned some sort of valuable lesson. So to give an example of how this personal sacrifice might play out in the context of the climax, let's say that you have a novel where the protagonist is a businessman and he wants to get this top position at this company and he's willing to do whatever he has to do to get it. So he lies and he cheats and he ruins the life of a more qualified candidate in order to be the one who gets the position. He may realize at the climax of the novel, depending on what his character arc is, when it comes to completion, he might realize to experience real success in life, I need to do this the right way, I need to be honest, and this isn't what I need. This success is false and it's not what I need. So he might let go of a previous belief, he might let go of his flaws, and he may give the position to the more qualified candidate that he undermined, and thus he's sort of throwing himself under the bus and making a sacrifice because he realizes that what he really wants, he's not going to achieve in the way that he's been going about it. So depending on the novel, you may then want to give another type of success to the character, especially if you want the novel to end on a more positive note, but you want the character to have growth. A lot of the time, the way that would be achieved would be something like the boss of the company admires this character's honesty and decides to give him not quite as good of a position, but still he gets to have a nice position within the company. Depending on the genre, that can feel like a really positive way to end the story because you're ending on a nicer note, it's a little bit happier, and maybe you don't want to have a negative ending. If you're writing more realistic fiction, you have to be careful because it can come across as a little bit contrived if the character ultimately succeeds and wins and is given like a booby prize instead of the big prize. It can come across kind of contrived, so it really depends, and you have to make a judgment call based on the genre that you're writing in and what your readers will expect, as well as the overall tone and realism of the novel. So the last component of the climax that I'm going to go over today is the protagonist's role in the climax. It is totally fine for the protagonist to use allies to help get to the climactic scene or to help facilitate certain elements of solving the problem, but there should be a final climactic moment in the novel where the protagonist has to act entirely on their own. They can have other characters, side characters, allies battling around them, but they should have a moment where they face the antagonistic force, look it in the eye, and fix the problem or fail to fix the problem. It can be very problematic if the protagonist ultimately doesn't solve the problem in the end because it's not very satisfying for the reader. The reader has stuck around and watched this character through this whole journey, and they want that payoff of seeing the character, the protagonist, face the antagonist. So if you deprive the reader of that, it often doesn't go very well. It doesn't give you a lot of room to execute that character arc. And overall, it doesn't give the reader that satisfying ending to see this protagonist has grown and changed and was able to get what they want, or was able to make a strong effort to get what they want but ultimately fail. So at its essence, the climax is all about payoff. The character demonstrates growth by completing the character arc that's been built to the entire novel. Skills, allies, and information obtained earlier in the novel are put to use, and the protagonist achieves or fails to achieve the goal that they've been striving towards. So I really hope this video gives you a strong idea of how to execute the climax of your novel. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about the pinch points. I know that is commonly confusing, or a lot of the time it's very difficult to grasp what that means, so I'm hoping to cover that in a way that is helpful. And thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and please subscribe so that you can get all of the new videos, and I will see you again tomorrow.